Britain has long prided itself on being a global leader, a dependable ally, a military power of significant standing. Yet, as our allies now look to us for serious support in Ukraine, Lord Dannett's assessment lays bare an uncomfortable truth. Our military is a shadow of its former self, crippled by austerity, neglect, and an absence of long-term strategic vision. So, how can the UK, once at the forefront of European security, now find itself incapable of leading a meaningful peacekeeping mission? And why is this decline not just an accident but the result of deliberate policy choices, and can we change it? To appreciate the scale of Britain's military decline, look at the hard numbers. As of October 2024, the British Army stood at 74,612 regular personnel, including the Gurkhas and reservists. The target recruitment numbers have been missed almost every year since 2010, leading to a steady erosion of manpower. The Navy is scrapping ships because of a lack of sailors, with HMS Westminster and HMS Argyll being decommissioned years ahead of schedule. Only 148 Challenger 2 tanks are being upgraded, while the Warrior Infantry fighting vehicle upgrade has been cancelled entirely. Against these statistics, the proposal for a 100,000 strong European peacekeeping force in Ukraine, of which Britain would need to supply a significant share, appears almost farcical. Lord Dannett's concern is not hyperbole. It's a damning indictment of the state of our armed forces. And the decline of Britain's military is not simply a consequence of changing global patterns. It's the product of austerity and short-termism in decision-making. The 2010 Defence Review under David Cameron, the government inherited a $35 billion black hole in the defence budget. Where have we heard that before? The response? Cost-cutting measures that included the premature scrapping of the Harrier aircraft fleet, leaving Britain without an aircraft carrier-based fighting capacity for years. The 2% GDP spending target, while NATO's minimum defence spending is 2% of GDP, the UK's spending remains woefully inadequate in the face of modern threats. Even the pledge to increase this to 2.5% lacks a concrete timetable. The hollow force of the army, senior military figures, including General Sir Richard Sheriff, warn that today's British Army is not just underfunded, but structurally incapable of sustaining long-term operations without severe strategic risk. The UK's military decline is set against a backdrop of shifting global security alliances. Trump's view on NATO, the former, Trump has repeatedly suggested that Europe must do more to fund its own defence. And his recent discussions with Putin about ending the Ukraine war have further unsettled allies in Europe. The US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth warned that Europe should not assume America's presence in NATO is guaranteed indefinitely. And there's even rumours that Trump is considering leaving NATO. With America looking inward, European states need to fill the gap. Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the former NATO Secretary General, has argued that Britain and France should lead a 100,000 strong peacekeeping force. The irony, Britain doesn't have the troops to take on this leadership role. Britain has made the mistake of neglecting military preparedness before, often with dire consequences. Following World War I, British policymakers assumed that no major war would occur in the next decade, and this assumption led to chronic underfunding of the military, leaving the UK dangerously unprepared for World War II. The 1930s saw Britain speaking boldly while carrying a small stick. Neville Chamberlain's failure to deter Hitler is an instructive lesson on the cost of neglecting deterrence. At the height of the Cold War, Britain spent 7% of its GDP on defence. Today, with Russia waging a war in Europe, the figure is just over 2.3% if we're lucky. If Britain is serious about maintaining its role as a key security player, significant reforms are needed and fast. We need to commit to 3 to 4% GDP in terms of defence spending, and Lord Dannett and General Sheriff argue that Cold War levels of funding are necessary to restore our military capabilities. We need a full-scale review of military recruitment and retention policies. That is essential. And the failure to meet recruitment targets over the last decade is a crisis that requires urgent intervention. We need to rebuild the army and the navy, and scrapping warships and underfunding ground forces while expecting to lead in global security is a contradiction that needs to be addressed. And we need to prepare for long-term engagement in Ukraine. The UK cannot continue to pledge support without the means to sustain it. Investment in a scalable force capable of long-term deployment is now imperative. Britain stands at a critical juncture. The world doesn't wait for indecisive nations to catch up. As Lord Dannett says, our inadequacy is not just embarrassing, it's strategically dangerous. If the UK fails to act now, it risks being sidelined in global security affairs, unable to protect its own interests, let alone lead peacekeeping efforts. The time for complacency is over, it's past. The time for decisive investment in our defence is now.